Good. I know that James should be popping in here shortly, so I'm going to give it a moment before I begin. And there he is. Welcome, James.
I'm here.
Good deal. I was hoping if I was able to schedule things to this time, you'd be able to make it again.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I wanted to tell you one thing off the bat. You probably have noticed it. And I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I put out a call the other day, but it was the holiday, I guess, the start of this week. So, but you're noticing that there's only project management content right now. And so I'm glad to see you working on that. That's what I'm prepared to talk about today, even though I think it meant to be set up the other way around to do the web security first. But I will get that content onto the system for you or somehow access to you before the week's out so that you have it for next week. This class is actually kind of two half classes put together. So, the project management part, whether we do it first or second doesn't matter. You have enough to make week. But I just want you to know that there is the other piece of that. But for some reason, it's not populating through a live training system. It should show it should show project management and web security as two different sets of modules. So anyway, I see you've made a start on project management. Yeah, having any issues to begin with?
Not really, other than this this project for the waterfall method, like whole. What's it called here?
Are you talking the hands-on that's in?
Yeah.
Let's see, one of them. Oh, lesson 5. That. So what's the issue you're having with that? Is that where you're at right now?
Yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Cool.
Just trying to figure out what I should do this time, because like the example it gives, I don't really know a whole lot about, which is web development. I don't really know anything about developing web applications.
Okay.
So that example.
At the assignment itself, one of the things that I do remember it saying is that you could theoretically sort of come up with your own project. So if that makes you more comfortable, I haven't looked at that file or that whole detail because that obviously wasn't a lecture. You don't lecture on the assignment per se or talk about it. But I did look at it, and the only thing that looked like you just have to pull that file out of GitHub, fork it as they reference it in development terms, and then you can cut and paste it, put it back in, drag and drop it back in. But if you have questions about the web development, I can look at it, or we can talk about it. I can help you try to understand that, or you can just create your own project, whatever you're more comfortable with doing, James.
Yeah, I was just going to do my own project. I was just thinking towards what I was going to do on that.
Gotcha. Well, you just got to keep it about that same level of fidelity, and it won't be any issue with it at all. This is things that there's a couple things that as we go into a second round, you're a canary in the coal mine. You've run into this before, actually, where there was one time where the content wasn't there right off the bat as you reach the classes for the first time in our program. Right. And so, like I said, I'll get that web security thing taken care of. I'm sure that's a pretty easy fix once I get to the right person and get it in front of the right person to get it pushed over there. I know it's live. I've seen it in the development side. And then, one of the things that I think is going to happen, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this at the end of it, particularly, but this may be one of these modules that we'll need to make a separate version of more for this class. I thought that from the beginning myself. I'm not trying to be critical. They're aware of that it was already built, so we were using it. And I think it does a good job of being an overview to project management, which is really all we need from a security point of view. Not so much the software development side, the agile.
Right.
It's good to know it because even in security, we're going to be dealing with software developers. So we want them to put good practices into their project planning as well. And include.
Yeah.
It's important to be able to speak the words and understand the high level. I think for me, that's the biggest thing that I want people to take out of this is, understand what project management is, understand that traditional / waterfall was the sort of Microsoft project way of timelines and Gantt charts and all that. And then the other methods are different methods, mainly focused on software development. And they're important to know, and know the difference between sort of Scrum and Kanban and different things. And so, obviously, I'll go over some of this with you, some of it just to put on the video as well. But if you have any specific questions, then let me know along the way. This is, of course, there are a lot of lessons. That's another thing. I think if nothing else, it needs to be put into the same kind of model. I want all the classes in this 10, ideally. So there'll probably be some tweaks to this going forward. So feel free to do anything you think a good project there. And I'm glad that they did have that flexibility because, some of our folks aren't going to have the web development background that obviously the folks going through the full stack web have or they're getting. Right?
Like that was kind of the thing I noticed. I'm like, wow, this looks like another pulled lesson just because it doesn't really – it's like just kind of the style of it changed, I guess is the best way to put it.
That's one of the things that's been going on is that, there's a whole bunch of different programs on the full stack, the developer side. And so there's a lot of different authors on that side. And so one of the things that they've been trying to do as an organization, and so since ours is one of the newest programs, if you looked at data science, you'd see more in-lesson stuff there too. Because we're the newer programs, they're converting a lot of the other. Python was in 10 lessons, but it was still a different style. But the Python, I think, drops in for the most part, with maybe a tweak or two here or there. I think it drops in really well. And this one, I think, informationally does. But I think I would like to see a little bit more. There's a couple things I'd like to see in future, but we'll go through it, make sure that you understand it because it is important. A lot of security stuff, just like developing an application. Ideally, you don't want to do it willy-nilly. You want to have some form of a project plan. Right. And you could even argue that in a big enough organization, if I kind of try to do a quick summary course, it starts off with the first couple of lessons, really just a quick intro, and then setting up your Tello board account. But then a deviation through the software developer's life cycle. Which we've mentioned in the courseware before, the whole idea of analysis, design, implementation, test, and then deploy. Because we talked about secure deployment and that there's usually those phases, right? Development, testing, staging, and then deployment. So we've covered an element of that. And of course, that life cycle generally is a big circle like many of these models. And so that's, you have the idea of, say, the traditional waterfall method of, we're going to plot out all the points on a chart as we go across. We're going to figure out our critical path. What's going to help, going to be our constraints. Is there any problem? If something fails, how does that flow down through the whole and affect the whole timeline? Is kind of the traditional model. And then, of course, when you look at the other models, as we get deeper into things like the agile model and the different versions of that, the idea is that they're trying to switch from, okay, we're going to plan out and scope a whole project and then plan out every step of it, to let's plan out almost a phases approach. Let's get the most important things out. Let's add features as we go. And then we, in one form or another, get into a continuous development loop. And so from a software development point of view, especially when you think about like web services and things like that, that they don't even necessarily release like on a CD anymore, a product, right? Facebook just updates. So that fits that kind of model well. And it's important to know you might do security for Facebook or some company like that, right? A web company. So you need to know how their team works and where you can interject security into it. We're going to do testing at your development stage. We're going to do testing at the unit test here at the production at the testing stage. We're going to roll out. We're going to do all that. We're going to combine these methods. But you could argue in a big enough organization that it's potential that their whole security framework could be implemented and managed under one of these, because as we've talked about, going back to those first couple lessons or the first couple weeks of Intro to Security, and we talked about, and we've mentioned them again, the NIST frameworks, the PCI DSS, all these different frameworks. And so a large company builds a very big security policy, all kinds of procedures and manuals and guidelines and documents, and ultimately, you could say that that's comparable to the millions of lines of code over a program, right? And just like they're going to continuously be doing their process of doing updates, it's very likely that this big multinational company could benefit from having kind of an agile approach. And instead of just doing it one off, as I've talked about before in lectures and we mentioned in the material, that the security policy itself is not an end goal. It's not we write the whole thing, we write all our policy, we're done, yay, and security is secure, because the attackers are evolving. We may buy another company, we change products, we upgrade. And so we need to then constantly be iterating through. So it's possible that we're not going to get rid of that, but we might take the examples in future more towards security and frameworks and things like that. So but anyway, if I just kind of go, that sort of, the first stuff is just a traditional model, and that's kind of where you are now. And then to kind of get you prepped as you head into the later part of the week, what you're going to see is a number of these lessons on where Agile came from. It's interesting. It sort of came from, they reference back to lean project management or just in time, right? And that they credit from the gentleman from Tokyo who worked with Toyota to improve their processes. And really, that whole just-in-time model is hugely powerful in the manufacturing space. And so the idea was, okay, well, we can improve how we do traditional project planning with just-in-time. So now we're going to apply that. And so ultimately, the rest of this whole lesson is about agile project management, basically taking the lean project management approach and applying it to software development. Though, as I said, it honestly, in certain cases, could be applied to obviously other things, complex processes, including a complete security framework for a company. And so they talk a little bit about agile, and they talk about the 12 principles of agile. And then, and then they actually start to, hang on, yeah, my notes, I just wrote them. I can't even read my notes. They then talk about some of the different frameworks. They mentioned 3, Scrum, Kanban, I guess I'm saying, Kanban, well, I may not be saying that one right. I'm not as familiar with that one. And then the other one, extreme programming. They don't end up then going into any more detail about extreme programming. And so just be aware of what that one is. But the other 2 then is what actually the last, number of lessons are about, is the sort of the difference between the Scrum model and the Kanban model. And so the Scrum model actually, remember, they're both trying to be agile. They're both trying to get at doing things quicker. They're trying to strip out any waste. One of the big things that you see with any of these agile models, I guess you get it from the name agile, right? But they're trying to be more flexible, because one of the problems with that traditional water flow method is, ideally, you're planning everything out, and so you're having to allocate very specific chunks of time to each task. And then if something messes up, right, somebody gets sick in the middle of that, or as they mentioned, somebody realizes, oh, we need another feature, then we're having to go back here and recalculate that entire flow, and it impacts all kinds of things, critical path. It can cause the whole thing to be pushed off, budgets to be blown. And so the idea is, with the more flexible models, is they try to not be so precise. It's like they try to be more flexible, and they try to be a little more open with how they estimate things. Instead of saying this is going to be task X that lasts so many days, in the Scrum model, for example, they particularly talk about, make sure I didn't lose my place here. I did lose my place. They talk about, where was that? Hang on, sorry, James. They talk about the story points. Okay, and so anyway, but before we get there, and so what that is a way to sort of rank a project, instead of being a case of it's going to be 2 days or 3 days. It's a kind of a ranking system as to how complicated the task is. And so, before we get to that, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I see where I lost my place here. So Scrum, basically, ultimately, they talk about having 3 pillars: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So the idea, like I said, of being more flexible, being more open as to what's going on. Instead of one of the things that happen a lot of times, it's funny, I know a lot about traditional / waterfall project management, even though I've done more software development in my life than I've done project management, I also, of course, have been a teacher off and on, all through my life in different places. And back years and years ago when I taught for New Horizons, one of the things that I got involved in with them was I was living in New Orleans at the time, and a major shipbuilder is there. And they had just gotten this contract from the Navy to build, 100 transport ships or something, merchant marine kind of ships carrying cargo for the Navy, not armed, but just, cargo vessels. And so this company was already big, but they were just expanding along, the dock spot there. And they were just hiring because they had just gotten this contract that was like 10 times bigger than anything they'd gotten before. And so they hired New Horizons to dedicatedly send out instructors that I didn't go to New Horizons for months. I didn't teach a class in their facility for months. I went to this place, and I was in it, basically like you've seen at schools, when they outgrow their school buildings, they put those little temporary classrooms along the side of the high school. Mm-hmm. Well, they had 5 or 6 of those out there all in a row, and 5 or 6 of us people that New Horizons contracted, like I did for New Horizons. We were sent there, and we were training all kinds of things. But one of the things that I was teaching was Microsoft Project. And Microsoft Project is exactly, that sort of traditional model of you put in all the pieces, you analyze everything. And, of course, you could make jokes about government contractors, but anytime you get such a big, huge project going, the odds that you've estimated all of those steps right is almost astronomically impossible, right? You're talking about building a huge ship, even if they've already built some and they've done it before. The odds that something else isn't going to happen on ship 2, ship 3, ship 4, you can plan all you want, but it's not going to be so precise. And so then when things do go wrong, then there's major adjustments. People are having to go in and recalculate and redraw. But in these other systems, as you're going to see, that's one of the reasons they have you set up. I believe you use it for the final project or something, one of the other exercises later. The Tello board, and actually WashU is using their own Tello board. That's how some of the Q&A is done on some of the courses, so that the team, because they're kind of using one of those a more agile method, more Scrum it seems. It's kind of a little bit of a mix depending on which side. I think that you could argue that the team that's actually writing the LMS, the actual, the web engine we log into to take the classes, that they're doing more of I think the other model, more of a continuous, improvement model. But all of these, both Scrum, all these agile models, they're trying to, we're going to take things into different, we're going to make it so that we're not so precise on and the idea is that we're not going to get so bogged down on the project planning that we waste so much time with that. You know what I mean? We're going to get the work done in a different kind of more conceptual way. So the Scrum is it starts off with, like I said, it has those principles, but then I keep grabbing the wrong sheet. There are a number of roles that are important to know. If you really are running a Scrum team, and I know that actually for the folks in the full stack web development program, their final project actually is a group project that they kind of work together as a Scrum team, and they even rotate some of these roles, each week. And so the roles are like the Scrum Master, the product owner, and they of course then just the dev team. And usually those are fixed roles, but like I said, for their final project, they rotate being the Scrum Master. And then one of the things that they have is there they are. Is we have a series of things we need to produce. They call them Scrum artifacts. They like some interesting names with the Scrum stuff, but basically they call what they're going to do, a task, as a user story. And then this is where I'm talking about the estimating being a little more flexible. Instead of saying this task or user story, if we're going to call it in Scrum, is going to take 2 weeks, we're going to assign it what they call story points. And story points are a ranking system. And they talk about even a particular progression, but in a way, if you want to compare it to, it's almost like a little bit more like, remember in risk assessment, we talked about you could do a qualitative risk assessment where you could say, okay, I have a high, a low, a severe, ranked risk assessment. or you could do a qualitative where you actually calculate the dollars, right? Those are the types of risk assessments you can do. Well, in a sense, if I make an analogy that is a little loose, but I hope it'll help you with it, the waterfall method is kind of more like doing that qualitative. We're going to try to precisely 2 days, 2 weeks, we're going to lay it all out and project it out. Whereas over here with Scrum or these various versions of the Agile project management, what we're seeing is more of the qualitative. So instead of saying it's going to be 1 week, 1 day, 2 weeks, whatever, we're going to give it a ranking, a point score. So, and and you'll read through it when you get to that. They give you an example. It's obviously in software development, but that's actually pretty easy to follow because it's like one of the features that they're looking at, one of the user stories that has come in, a request, if you will, to do a task is to provide a tooltip for some button, right? And that's actually pretty easy to do in most programs. In HTML, it's really easy to do if you're writing a web page. So, I mean, so they give that only 1 point. And then, of course, they have different points that scale up and to where they then have an example of somebody who wants a feature that's going to require 4 or 5 substeps, and because of the progression they're using, they end up with a 54-point story point. The idea is that you're ranking how complex these tasks are, and by keeping track of story points, you can keep track of progress, right? If you lower your story points from 1 week, then you must have cleared some of those tasks off your board, right? It's just a nomenclature and a different way of thinking about it is really what I'm trying to get. And in a way, that's kind of, I guess the best analogy I have is that the old school traditional project management is very much like trying to do an accounting qualitative. I'm going to calculate this out. If my web server goes down and I make $10,000 an hour, then I lose this much plus the cost of fixing and me and blah, blah, blah. And I do a full calculation. Over here, that's a high risk for me, or that's a low risk for me. That's, and that's sort of, so somewhere in between is kind of what they're doing with that model. And then, of course, they talk about things like their backlog, which is basically the queue of user stories or the queue of work they need to get done, right? And they talk about the burn down chart, which is an implementation of sort of as they start knocking things off of their storyboard. And then they talk about the velocity chart, which is basically, this is how they can tell whether a team is progressing or not, is if the story points go down. Since the story points estimate the complications of the task, right? So we can judge our team, positive if they went from 200 story points last week to 150 story points. They must have gotten a fair number of tasks done. Basically, they got a quarter of their task. Now, they don't talk about this in the thing. I don't think. They may mention it briefly because they talk about advantages and disadvantages. And I didn't obviously write down everything. But one point that struck me about that model is that like any system can be gamed a little bit. So like, okay, if I told you that a Scrum team had taken its, story points down from 200 to 150, that seems like that's a 25% improvement, right? They've knocked off 50 of those points in whatever period of time, a week, a month. So they must be a pretty productive team. But that may not tell you, if you really are honest about it, like what did they do? Did they all decide near the end of the month to knock out a bunch of the easy tasks so they could make their numbers look good? And they really got a bunch of big work stacked up, all the higher point ones they haven't even touched yet. I mean, so it's just one of these things. All these project management is all about like budgeting. It's all about trying to create some kind of outline that you some kind of methodology so you actually get stuff done, and especially if you see it in teams because, like you've obviously, I don't know, I doubt you've created yourself a project plan, but maybe in your head, you are a self-motivator. You keep cranking through this stuff. You've done well. We have other stuff that are progressing well. I got one, as I told you, chasing you, and then another batch coming up. So, and I'm glad to see that. But, once you get to working with other people, sometimes that can be a good or bad experience. So ultimately, project management in the broadest sense is trying to make sure that all the different disparate pieces come together. And it can be kind of the traditional, very meticulous model, or it can be some of these more open models. Now, to finish up on Scrum, though, so we've got the Scrum users, we've got the artifacts, the way they call things, and then there's ceremonies. It's a very interesting methodology that we have name everything. And so they have, of course, the Scrum workflow is based on it comes down to what they call a sprint. we're going to make a sprint to accomplish so much, whatever a certain goal is, or to lower so many points, or we're going to get a certain feature out. And that could be days, or it could be weeks, or whatever. And so during that sprint, they have a particular goal, and they'll plan that out. And then they have what they call a daily stand-up meeting. One of the things you'll notice in some of these is a lot more communication. The traditional model, a lot of times what you have is somebody or multiple people are running Microsoft project, and they got all the information, they fill in the project, and then their job is to make sure, they check with some project manager has to go out and go, okay, did you get your job? Check it off. Oh, you're behind. Oh crap, I got to recalculate. You see what I mean? Whereas in these kind of cases, these are more team-based approaches. There still is an owner of the project, and then the Scrum Master is supposed to be the team lead, but they're supposed to be team. They're supposed to be more collaborative is one of the things they're trying to encourage too, which I actually do think is useful, especially it's their emphasis of bringing both the business people and the technical people together. So to make sure as we're building a product, we're staying on track of what we're wanting to accomplish for the customer. So they have a daily stand-up meeting where they basically, are going to talk about what they're going to attempt to do. And then, of course, when they finish, they have their sprint review and respective. And then there's a task, which is basically backlog grooming, which is ultimately, if you got your backlog, that's the story point. The user stories you haven't gotten to yet, you've got to, decide to roll them into your next sprint. Or, ultimately at some point, some things may just go away. They may be dropped from your log. We decided that feature wasn't such a good idea, or we'll put it on the back burner for later. So there's this whole, and then they begin again. So if they're going to do a week-long sprint, they're going to have a kickoff meeting. The team's going to be defined. The goals are going to be outlined. They're going to be trying to accomplish some such goals or lock off so many points or whatever they're doing. Every day they're going to have this a meeting to talk about it, see where they stand. The Scrum Master is supposed to sort of have taken on that project management role of clearing at impediments. If in that meeting, so-and-so says, well, I'm waiting on graphics from whatever. Well, then that Scrum Master needs to go get on somebody in graphics and try to get that in, so they can finish that development step. And that doesn't become one of those waterfall moments where it now cascades down and breaks the whole plan. So Scrum is just an interesting model. They then talk about, after they talk about what Scrum is and how it's this team-based approach, they then talk about some of the tools, and that's actually where Trello comes up. But they also talk about literally sticky notes, and they show a picture of a whiteboard. Somebody stuck all these notes up. That's sort of how a lot of people first began with this. But then they also talk about a couple other pieces of software, the Jira and the Microsoft Team Foundations product, which are basically kind of like the Trello board. I don't know if you've logged in or created that account yet. I guess you probably have, but it basically lets you set up column headings so you can have different projects, and then you can have these notes underneath, and so those become those user stories, those tasks that project, or that, and that's how they're doing it here. There's columns for all the courses. And when somebody finds, something wrong with particularly one of the older courses, then they post it there. And when somebody gets assigned to go and do that next loop, that next sprint, and we're going to update that course, then they go and take all those off that board and they go do them, right? So that's sort of how that's run. And then they finished up talking about, and they kind of have the model of doing the same for Kibana. So I'll go through that. Kanban. I keep wanting to say Kibana for some reason, or Katana. I don't know why. Kanban. But they talk about some of the challenges, and they talk about how you can, if you deviate, of course, deviation is a problem. Getting people to buy into this model. To be honest, sometimes it's hard to get stakeholders or owners, managers to buy into an agile software development model if they're used to the more traditional. They like that black and white, do in a week, done or not, we adjust, as opposed to, okay, we're doing this and we're rotating and we run and we do another batch, and it's kind of a little more loosey-goosey. The theory is, though, that these models will actually lead to more production, because if nothing else, you try to take away some of that top-down overhead of the project management traditional model. But one of the things that's funny is that both, I find this humorous, and it makes sense, though, because ultimately it is the problem with, when you get down to it, it's the problem with project management. I don't care what model. But ultimately, if you kind of go back for a second, okay, traditional was this very regimented way of doing it. And then the gentleman from Japan tried Toyota tried to make it more lean and just in time for manufacturing, and then they've tried to adapt it to software development through these different methods like Scrum and Kanban, and they were responding to the rigidness and the fact that one of the biggest problems with project management traditional is estimation, because that's the whole point. If you estimate, over or underestimate, and then you're going to get off, right? So I found it kind of humorous that when you get down to it, they listed for both Scrum and Kanban, estimation is still a problem. And I guarantee you that if that was, like I know actually there is one, but I would bet that if that was a question, it would be on the test for like the Project Plus, for a certification. What is the single biggest problem with all project management methods? Estimation. That's what it comes down to. That's the problem. If we had somehow magic foresight, or we could hire the oracles of Delphi to do our project planning as a corporation, and we could then put it out and know exactly what was going to happen and never be wrong, we would have never come up with Agile. The original project management method would have worked for everybody and everything. But of course, we don't. And so that becomes too rigid. And so while I understand that there's other variants and they're trying to adapt for software and whatnot, it is still kind of humorous to me that estimation is still the underlying problem that both of them list pretty much first, or is one of the big major problems. Because ultimately you can still do it, even if you're doing it by, think about it. At the end of the day, if I say a day task in the traditional waterfall project management, if I say a task is going to take a day and it takes a week, that screwed something up on my plan, very likely, right? And if multiple things go wrong, then I've really probably thrown my project off. Okay, so we decide we're going to go all Agile. We're going to go Scrum. We're going to set up our stories, our user stories. We're going to assign them their story points, their difficulty. And if I estimated that wrong, I think that's only a 1 and it turns out to be a 20, then I'm still throwing things off. So at the end of the day, that's really what it is estimation is the problem. So, the best thing you can do is be as thoughtful about your estimates or your ranking of story points or whatever the system you're using is be as thoughtful about that and as logical as you can be, and then be ready to adapt when it comes down to it. So then to finish up the last few things, which is the Kanban model, one of the things that it tries to do is enhance the workflow, visualize everything. They want to minimize the work in progress, and it definitely is a continuous improvement loop. The Scrum model is agile. It's quicker than, say, traditional, theoretically, if this is a really good Scrum team going and you get everybody on board and the buy-in and everything else, and it starts working. I actually think, to be honest with you, I think that one of the reasons that some of this stuff has been developed is actually to try to adapt to who we're trying to manage. Think about that. If you think about traditional project management and that company I talked about that builds ships, they got construction workers and mechanics and engineers and architects and accountants and all this stuff, right? All these people can, in their minds, they're experts in their areas, so they can come together and they think they can make these estimates and they think they've made a good estimate. But that works for that kind of organization. But if you think about who are we trying to manage with agile software project management? We're software developers. I don't know if you know many of them, but most computer geeks are kind of opposite of rigid, and they're kind of lazy, loosey-goosey. They would prefer not a suit and tie. They would more comfortable attire when they go to work. They may want to work from home. They may work in bursts, and so if you're trying to wrangle herd cats of developers together with the traditional project model, you get a lot of pushback because they're like, oh, I don't know how long it's going to take, or, oh, I told you, oh, I'm sorry, it took longer, or, there's just a lot of, issues that you're trying to be too regimented for that mindset, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the reasons we've seen these models develop, is to try to sort of empower the team. And then if you can do that, then at least they're using some aspects of project management to move forward instead of just being willy-nilly, loosey-goosey, do whatever they want kind of thing, right? So anyway, that's, I guess, just an aside there. But so the big difference that I found, of course, there's different, they do a little bit different. They have, instead of, even though it's kind of the same, they have the board and the cards, which the board is sort of the big board that Scrum would use. The cards would be like the Post-it notes, they would be their user stories. These are the things we're doing. And then, of course, when somebody gets assigned something, they can take those cards off the board when they're done. There is a concept of keeping track of whether something is to be done, is being done, or is done. So to do, doing, or done in these models. But the biggest difference, they're both agile models, but really the biggest difference, and there's even a comparison chart at the end of the class of the content, is about just the way they work. There is a very formal structure, funny enough, given it's an agile method, that of those sprints. So Scrum has that set period of time where they sprint. They race toward a goal. That's the analogy there. They're going to try to get this next step out, get to this next feature list, knock these things off their board, and they sprint. They have their meetings, and then at the end they talk about it, and then they do it again. Whereas they don't have that structure on the combined side. It is a CI, or continuous improvement, continuous integration. So the idea is that they're constantly checking stuff, constantly doing things. And then when they have their meetings, they're making a decision as to whether it's good to go or not, kind of thing, as opposed to we're racing toward that. So that's kind of one of the big differences but they're both built toward, kind of modern, systems, especially I think you definitely see them in these web applications, and that is why it will fit. It might have even helped. You made the comment about, I don't have much, I'm not going to turn you into a web programmer in the web security part, but having that first before this still might have helped some, because in a sense, web applications, and that is kind of mobile applications, which are many times driven through HTTP port 80 anyway, and thus in a sense become web applications. So many of these applications, Facebook and games, where the changes happen on the server side, and the user just, when they log in or the next time they connect, they download an update and they're using that new content. Those are models where it's so different from, say, the old model of, okay, I'm going to, or still what happens, say, in PlayStation or Xbox, where they still have a release date. They burn a game to a stinking disk, right? And they ship it out and you go buy it in the store. But you don't go buy Facebook. You don't go buy Amazon. You don't go buy a lot of these other games. Even these games you do download, they're free to play, right? The server is all powered. They're constantly working on these things.
Fortnite is a good example of that right now.
Absolutely.
Like, it's just, I didn't even know the game existed until it was there available on the store, free to play. They had a purchase version available with some other features, demo, because it's still in beta on that side of things, and then constant updates.
Yeah, and that is absolutely the model. It's actually funny. I have been watching, of course, a lot of these things. I try to stay up. Fortnite just exploded. And
I don't particularly play it, but it's so relevant right now and everything. So in terms of gaming,
I have actually played it a little bit.
I've played it, but I'm
fair to say that it was more like MySQL, Oracle. It was it wasn't for you. Like you wouldn't have gone to Best Buy or Compus, whatever, and bought it. It wasn't an end user database like DBase. It was a back end database for developers to build apps on and build things on. And so, but we put it out. I worked for them for a little while, and I remember one of my jobs, and I was head of courseware development for their education team. And one of my jobs was to build the training that went on to the software developer kit. So they put me into the routine of having to check stuff into the repo, even though I was just writing kind of an HTML web page help course, and some sample apps. They still wanted me to join the sort of the dev team at that point, and made me go through their methods of how they did things. But they were more traditional, older school, standard waterfall model. And they ultimately were heading toward, they had to burn a master, get it to the foundry, print, tens of thousands of disks, and then ship them to upgrade partners and things like that, back still in those days. And so the traditional model worked for the most part. They would adapt by, it's the way most people used to adapt, and most people never knew this. Microsoft Word 2006 came out, or whatever, Office Suite 2006 came out, and it came out and you worked. But you didn't know because they didn't have 13 things they planned to have in there. They just didn't make it because they had to have that cutoff date, right? But nowadays, you got Office 360 in the cloud. If they wanted to add something, they could add it tomorrow. You log in and boom, you've got it, right? Or Fortnite wants to add something to their game. They can change the world. They can push out new models, and boom, everybody's got the new stuff. So yes, these to try to support these models, I think is really where you're going to see this. And if you end up working for any company that does deploy this kind of a model, as a security person, think about the risk. Because you're constantly doing this stuff, you're iterating, and you're updating and pushing new stuff live, you've got to make sure that security checks are in place all along that before it goes. Because one of the things, of course, that happened in the old model, and I saw it happen at Pervasive, is, as they were building the software internally, they would finally get to a point where we would have like an internal alpha, and they would go ahead and compile everything and put it on the disk like it was ready to go. But they knew certain things weren't there, certain things weren't final version. There was still a whole list of known issues, whatever. But they wanted to sort of get there so we could then take that and do some other testing. And we would hand that first off to the testing team, and they would start installing it on different systems, see if there was any errors. And of course, people would pound on it to make sure there, because we were a database. And as a matter of fact, at the time, most of the Peachtree accounting and all those kind of real world accounting, those packages that many companies use, most of them used that database behind. So it was very secure. We had to make sure that people couldn't get in, couldn't decrypt things. If it was encrypted, they couldn't get in if the password, but we would run a series of testing, and then we'd go back, they'd do a beta, we'd run more testing, and then they'd have the final release candidate, and it would all be internal, and our people would test, and we'd send it out to some of our partners, get that testing, and then finally release. And we're checking for security at each of those major steps. But if that database became a continuous integration, then every day something can be released, right? Technically, these games sometimes have changes, it seems like every day, every week. And so there's got to be a focus on security. So it's important. That's why it's important to understand project management, and even to understand the software side of it, because the likelihood that somewhere in your organization is going to be a software development team possibly using one of these models to update a user app. It might be an app that's only used inside, right? But still, if it has a security flaw that gets pushed out and gets slipped through, then the hacker potentially could take advantage of that. So, anyway, that's where these are all coming from. And I guess just to finish up, like I said, they talk about it being a continuous improvement model instead of the sort of sprints. That's one of the differences. And then there's a little bit more flexibility on the Kanban side because of the open, just constantly going kind of thing. But then when they talk about their challenges, they come back to the same thing, estimating. And so really that's the key takeaway from all project management, is estimating is the core of the problem. Because if we didn't estimate wrong, we wouldn't have any problems regardless of model we used. But we always do as humans, and always things happen. So it kind of comes down to, which is the best model for the thing you're doing. In many cases, I would assume that doing security planning would probably be more of a waterfall, traditional. Okay.
At least in the initial step of it.
Yeah, at
I
least
feel like with a lot of this stuff, you could have that waterfall method in the beginning, but especially even with software. But then eventually, with the way things are today, with constant updates, you're eventually going to have to move to that. I guess what do you call it? The agile type thing,
agile
because
type.
eventually that's what you're going to become.
Well,
and then maybe if you have a new thing you're going to come out with, a major update, then you can go back to that waterfall for that stuff until you get back to just doing updates.
Which is actually something that arguably is not mentioned in this course, is a very valid point. Because there almost always is the hybrid option, right? That's not talked about here. And that, you just hit it on the head, James. That's reality. I actually have seen both methods within WashU. Okay? I have seen that overall, we put up a sort of traditional waterfall project plan for this courseware.
Right.
But then we also have a continuous and integration movement of, like, well, I've already fixed one, like you found that software that had gone out and I just went back and fixed it, because we're in a hybrid mode ourselves here, honestly. And then they're wanting me to go through a revision cycle, which definitely puts me more into the next mode of just knocking stuff out, right? So yeah, that's a really good observation, James. That really should be mentioned, because it's just like I was just doing when you popped in earlier. I was finishing up the logging and monitoring class, which of course you've taken. But I was talking about, and right there at the end, lesson 5, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, and how it can be passive or out of bound or inline. And then of course, ultimately we show some hybrid examples. And the reality is that's really spot on. I'm going to add that to my notes. We really should, because there's hybrid in multiple ways. Like you described, you could start maybe like, okay, we're an up and coming company. Our first security plan is going to be, here it is. We're going to take 2 weeks to plan it. We're going to so much to write it. We're going to do this. Here's our project plan. We're going to do we're going to have it all done by the end of 6 months. Yay. But then we're going to go into a continuous, loop of every so often, and we could do Scrum. Maybe we're only going to use quarterly sprints, right? Because we're not going to do it all. So you could adjust, or maybe we're just going to go Kanban and keep it kind of open, but we're going to be ready and adapting and constantly, making sure that everything can come in and get addressed. But then there's also the hybrid model of like what I described, where maybe this product, you got a manufacturing product, and because of experience and what they've done, and even though things go wrong, they're pretty good at mapping out traditionally how long it's going to take. And they're even using the lean model of just-in-time parts or whatever, and they're rocking along. But over here, my software team, maybe I need to have agile. So yeah, it's important to understand project management and the different types. But yeah, kudos to you again, James. You nailed on the head that the hybrid model should be best.
Like just an example for something that applies to me more. I work, on a golf course, and I'm actually pretty much over the golf course in the day-to-day side of the thing, which that kind of stuff, it's generally a regular rotation of things that have to be done regularly, that have to be met, and you just have to keep up with that to make sure those things are done regularly all the time. That would be like the constant, it's not really updates because it's usually the same process, but then again, you run into times where, all right, it rained 3 days this week and now we're behind, grass is going. We got to figure out a plan to adjust to get things caught back up, to keep things going. But then there's other times where you have an out of the ordinary project, you gotta have the steps that go along, you want to figure out how long it takes, all that, and then you'll go back to applying your regular routine of things after that.
Yeah, that's a good analogy too. I mean, I do it myself. I have things that are, this project, I've been operating under different project plan models. When I have my own projects, I try to outline out and create my own idea of a plan. And I'm kind of just hybrid myself. And then of course I have things just like you're talking about where, because of the existing work and clients and things I have and sites I host or whatever, I have to do the same thing. So there is sort of this continuing loop of work as well. But yeah, that's spot on, James. We will definitely have to, as part of any revision cycle, I'll make that suggestion. That's something that really is a valid point, that in many organizations, and from our point of view, from a security, the idea of understanding them all is important. and then understanding that the odds are you're probably going to run into more than one, depending on what, within an organization. Different groups might run things different ways. That hybrid model is spot on. Well, that is everything. Well, project management. Do you have any questions? I'm not running away. I just wanted to say.
It's just like, for the example, what I'm kind of planning on doing with the hands-on here is kind of just imagining in a situation where it's a new company that basically needs their whole internal network kind of set up for them.
Okay.
And all that kind of stuff, and just figure out the steps along to do all that to implement a new thing. That just seems like the best way that would apply to what I've been doing.
That would fit better with what you've been learning and help you make the step comparisons. It's actually important. As I said, I want project management. I'm not complaining here. It's all part of this process, right?
Right.
To make our big plan, we had to use some existing content. If it was even all be written, only can write so much in one time, and so we gotta stay out ahead of everybody. And so we've accomplished our big goal, but we know we're going to do another cycle and go into that mode of the continuous improvement. And so I really appreciate your being the canary in the coal mine. You found some things out front that I can quickly fix, or you've raised some things or made me think of some things that I'm going to go into that second revision, that revision cycle, and I'm going to adjust. And I can definitely see that, we could use some different examples for us in this version of the course. And that makes sense to me, because I'll give you a personal story. When I was in high school years and years ago, I up to a point was in honors math. I was always good at math, and I still am. But I hit this issue, which I won't get into. I just kind of hit this wall. It was, I guess, my rebellious youth, whatever, and then teacher and I not getting along and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up not getting into. I had been all the way honors math through honors trig, and then I ended up not even taking calculus. I decided, thankfully, actually, it was kind of a benefit. I took a computer math class, which was really an early hacking around on computers class, which was kind of cool. And that as a math credit. And then when I took a placement test for college, I tested through pre-calculus, so I didn't have to ever take actually math again in my bachelor's program.
Man, wouldn't that have been nice? I might have actually got a bachelor's if I didn't. Really, it's because
I had the math out of the way. That was one thing I was lucky about. But when I had to take it later, when I went to grad school, my advisor said, "There's no way you're going to grad school without calculus, boy," and literally made me take it. And I remember that when I took
I failed calculus twice.
I had such trouble with getting it. We're all fixed, flying velocities and stuff, and I was like, I'm not, I get that. I actually get it better than I did then. Now I've kind of self-educated to a degree, but then when I finally got into that graduate program and I took this higher level economics class, the professor actually was the one who told me I couldn't get in his program without taking calculus. He started using it inside of a field I understood, economics, and the light bulb went off, and I'm like, oh my God, I get it now. So examples can be really good. So yeah, please do exactly that, James. And I'm glad that the lesson was, at least, I think they wrote it flexibly because they knew it's part of multiple programs, even inside of the full stack web. There's .NET framework, and they've got all different. So they kind of kept it flexible, and I'm glad they did, because that works for us too. But yeah, I think that'll be a couple of the hybrid model. I've already got a couple notes, and the idea of maybe having some examples for us that are more security oriented. And I think we got a rocking class here to give people what they need, which is an understanding of this as they go out and try to really get in the world and have to deal with it. Well, cool. Yeah. You got any other questions, James?
I'm going to try and make sure it's that 1,500 words it asked for, but I'll get as close as I can to it.
Okay.
I'm hoping that's not too firm.
I would assume
as long as I get the points to where I think I've understood that it gets across, that somebody else could understand it and implement it, is what it seems like it's asking.
Yeah, well, and
that's what I'm going to go for.
That I doubt there'll be any issue, but let me know. This is actually one of the first times we've got something that submits through, in the programs, and some of our other stuff you can't upload a 10 gig topography, whatever, a whole VM or something into their system. And they don't have the virtual networking built into the system, so we've had to go third party with our solutions. But let me know. I'll be interested to see how that all works, and whether even the system is going to counter save something, or if it's just up to Joy to take a look at it and make sure it's hit the points. She'll know better than me, because she went through that program and was taking this course actually. sort of like the Python. But I don't have an issue. Like I said, I know we'll have to do a little adapting. If you run into any issues submitting or any issues with it at all, just let me know. And like I said, I'm gonna follow up on why the web application security module is not there. But it will be there. I'll get it there somehow or the other before the end of the week, so you can get into that as you get through project management, head into next week.
Well, I think right now it's showing my due dates for this does not, like my lesson 19 is not due till June 9th.
Well, the lesson, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a little off. I think there's two things that happen. One, well, I know there's two things that happen, and I'm a little out of the loop here, being where I am. But they changed the LMS again between the last start and this start. And so when I logged in, instead of it asking me to put the due dates for just the quizzes, they have now implemented this new model of the practice versus required hands-ons. And so they've changed something in the back end, and when it came up, it pre-populated everything. And so to be honest with you, especially given I already knew, I think there's going to be a bug in that. So I would tell you that you really should think about trying to finish this project management this weekend, because ostensibly it's supposed to be like if our normal classes are 40 hours and you have 2 weeks, these are actually each 20-hour courses.
Okay.
So they're in principle, you should be roughly at a pace of one per week. And it's weird because I think the whole web security is one big long module, and this one's 19 very short ones.
Right.
So they're both going to have to get changed to 10, I guess.
Because like I know it's like that one whole module was sign up for a Trello account, and that was it.
Yeah. And so, obviously what you can imagine that we would, when we make that and actually it needs to be made into 5 because it's only half, right? So like we would take those first 3 or so and make them one, and then make the one on the Scrum another one, and put the ones for Kibana together as another one. Kibana again. Sorry, go again. But you know what I mean?
It's fine. I get it. I'll probably make the same thing, do the same thing when I do it too. In my mind.
I keep saying it wrong. You'll probably think of it wrong, but anyway, yeah. So yeah, that's the thing. I put out a call over the holidays, and I thought it would get pushed. I checked again. You're definitely not seeing it, right? You're just seeing the project management.
No, I only see project management.
All right, I will get that.
I can look again right now.
Yeah, it could happen any time because I don't know if it's a batch thing they have to do. I actually submitted a couple tickets earlier, and they already fixed my access to the other one. So I don't know what happened about this. But anyway, that's the way things work. And different folks, I don't know who. I'll have to find out and re-follow up. Maybe somebody thought it got done and it just hadn't. They may even have to, I don't know. They might have to and we won't lose any progress if that's the case, but they may have to tear us down and recreate a class again to get it to win. That I don't know. That's beyond me. I've never had anything to do with the live. I don't have that kind of access. Besides, as a teacher instructor, of course, I don't have the access to the live that I do to the development site. So I kind of know what's going on high level, but I don't know who has to do it. I just go up the chain. Hey,
all right.
So I'll figure that out though, because I saw it wasn't there when I checked myself earlier, and so I appreciate you rechecking. And but yeah, I think you'll find this pretty straightforward, especially maybe with the overview to kind of help when you read through it. And then there's only a couple things you have to do. Really, it's mainly only a couple.
It looks like it's lesson 5, lesson 14, and lesson 18, and lesson 19.
And then the final. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The final quiz. So that's a different model too. We'll have to see. That'll be beyond me. I have some ideas, but I know that I'm sure if I went and looked, I'd see that there's already that's probably one queued up for that team to do because it's still in the 19. It's a different model. And so I want to definitely, since it hasn't been redone yet, I want to get our input in too. And that way we can cover all the bases going forward. Well, thanks again for coming. I'm so glad. I actually kind of chose when I had a reason I had to not do them all back to back. I started teaching that Pen Test Plus Train the Trainer for CompTIA last night. So I didn't want to just go all day like I usually do on Tuesday. And so I thought you guys that are more advanced, you and Charles in the logging class, I could push you off one day and it wouldn't hurt your feelings much. And plus it let me pick a later time where I was hoping you'd actually be able to make it again. So great.
Yeah.
I'm going to try.
Right now, normally I should be able to make it by 4. Only way I'm not going to be able to is if rain or something messes me up at work and I have to stay late.
I'm so glad. I've had others. You've been the most consistent now, especially since we've got this better time. Like I said, I think I want to feature request of surveying my students to find out what would be the best times, because I'll adapt, or I can, and then the other part of it is that as we keep growing, it's so nice to have the interaction, because like you not only help me find things, but that comment about hybrid, that's spot on. And then the interplay just makes it fun, as opposed to just sitting here talking to myself. So thank you for coming. I enjoyed it. If you have any questions, you know where to reach me, and crank out on a project, and I'll get you security stuff up. And I got to go and get all this stuff posted and get on with my evening. I guess this day is over for me.
All right.
5 here. So have a good one.
Have a good one.
See you next time, James. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.